Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. You know, I've had a wonderful career and the opportunity to work with some incredible people. If you know my tequila background, my business partner was Bill Walton, almost 10 years. And we had a wonderful time out there in the field doing all kinds of speaking engagements. And we also had the time to spend a lot of time with teams around the country. And it's amazing to me how leadership and teams are built and the people around those teams and everything that they bring to the equation. And that's why I'm excited to have today's guest on, Mark Oristano, who spent a lot of time with a very famous team. So Mark, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, speaking of broadcasting, Bill Walton's, he spends a lot of time on air.
Yes, I know Bill casually. I was an executive producer at a radio network where he had a show many years ago, and I talk to him every once in a while. He's a character, to say the least, but he's always interesting to listen to.
He was a lot of fun to be a business partner with. So, but look, we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about you and what you've done. If you don't mind, could you walk us back to some early days for you? You know, what got your career started, or maybe it was something in your childhood that really stuck out to drive you where you're at today?
Exactly. I grew up in a suburb of New York City called Mamaroneck, New York. And when I was a 14-year-old ninth grader, I became a rabid Dallas Cowboy fan. The first football game I ever watched with any interest was the Cowboys and the New York Giants. And Don Meredith threw a little pass over the middle to a guy named Bob Hayes, who was the world's fastest human. And Bob Hayes took it 68 yards for a touchdown, beating the defender step for step. And I was hooked. I became a mammoth Cowboy fan. My goal in life was to be in the locker room with the Cowboys when they won a Super Bowl.
Wow.
I was so fascinated with Texas and the Cowboys that when it came time to go to college, I went southwest to Fort Worth and Texas Christian University, go Frost, #2 in the country. And I majored in communications. The summer after my junior year, I was chosen to be an intern at the ABC station in Dallas, WFAA-TV, where I worked in sports for a guy named Vern Lundquist, who's a pretty famous sportscaster. He got me started. He was my mentor. And I eventually worked my way into jobs with the Dallas Cowboys on radio, writing for the newspaper as a PR assistant. I worked off and on for the Cowboys for about 14 years, the original Cowboys. Then I came back for 6 more years with Jerry Jones Cowboys. And that 14-year-old's dream of being in the locker room for the Super Bowl, I accomplished that when I was 25 years old when they beat the Broncos in Super Bowl 12. I held the trophy up in the locker room, and it was quite a moment to come from a 14-year-old to that point where I was now actually doing what I had dreamed of doing.
Unbelievable. Mark, what was it about this dream? Because we all dream, especially dreams when we're young, that kept you on track. I mean, we've all heard the stories. You get to college and then there's like a world of opportunity opens up. How did you stay on track in what you wanted to do in terms of being around the Dallas Cowboys or being a part of that franchise in some way or another?
Well, I think one of the things that kept me on track is one of the reasons that I'm here today, which is that I was so fascinated by the workings of the Dallas Cowboy front office, not the team. The team and the front office were both very separate. Tom Landry ran the team, and a guy named Tex Schramm, who was our president and general manager, ran the front office. And it was just a fantastic place to work. People stayed there for the entire 30 years that Tex ran the team. There was almost no turnover. Everybody in the country wanted to work for us, but very few got the choice. And I think it was all encapsulated for me mostly later in my tenure there when I talked to Tex one day and I said, why does everybody stay here so long? Why is this such a happy place to work? And Tex said, I've always felt like nobody does their best work in a climate of fear. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Because by that point, I'd worked for some radio people who managed by fear and who fired you for the least reason and didn't care for it and didn't care for them. And it was always, for me, much more interesting to be around people who were positive and encouraging and wanted to help you succeed so you could help them succeed.
Interesting. I want to touch on that in a minute, but I got to ask the begging question. You know, you went into broadcasting school. How did you know you had a voice for broadcasting? I mean, it's clear now that I've got you on the line, but how did you know?
Actually, when I started, I didn't, because I said I came from New York. And when I first got to Texas, I talked like a New Yorker. I had a really thick New York accent. And I had to get rid of that. I spent about 3 years listening to every word I said when I said it to make sure I was pronouncing it in a kind of more flat, non-New York way. But I really didn't know in terms of having a voice. I got chances and I took them, and I listened to, Vern helped steer me in the right direction. And I just was able to work with people who I like working for, who I got along with, and who helped me along.
Outside of that New York accent, did you have to just work with language skills and how to, really boost your voice strength, or were there coaching lessons involved, or was it just natural to you after you calmed the New York accent?
No, it didn't all come naturally. Actually, we're going to do a little trick now. If you want to get a better voice, if you lie on your back on a floor and you take a book and you hold it over your head and you read out loud for about 10 minutes a day, it'll teach you where your diaphragm helps push the sound out, where your diaphragm helps your speech improve and your power of your voice improve. Because gravity, when you're lying down, gravity is now working against your diaphragm, and it makes you train it like you train any other muscle. A diaphragm is just a big series of muscles across the bottom of your stomach. And I was told to do that by a speech teacher in college, and it must have worked. As you say, you talk about my voice. To me, it's just the way I speak. I don't think of it as anything particularly special, but it must be fairly good because I've been living all these years and people understand what I'm saying. So that's good.
Yeah, they keep paying you to show up. I love it. Yeah. Well, let's dig into a little bit of this office environment or this culture that you talked about with Tex, because I think it's so important. There's a lot of companies where people stick around, but it's why they stick around and what's important for that. Correct. So just as an example, my family and myself, I worked for many years with In-N-Out Burger. They have a great culture with In-N-Out. My brother was the CEO for 35 years, as well as the trustee of the company. And we knew that the culture there was matched the amount of time that people stuck there. And I understood that implicitly. But what was it about this organization that kept people there? What stood out?
I think what stood out mostly was that Tex had 3 rules for staffing an organization, and it worked for the Dallas Cowboys, and it would work for the New York Philharmonic, and it would work for the CI. It worked for anybody. And they very simply put them in order are: number 1, you hire the best people you can find. Duh. It's going to cost you a little more in the beginning, but it's worth it in the long run because they stay around longer, they work harder, they're smarter, et cetera. Excuse me, speaking of my voice. The second one is you train them your way. Meaning that if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you sign a new quarterback, you're not going to give him the Los Angeles Rams playbook. You're going to give him your playbook. You're going to show him how you do things and explain to him the why of why you do them that way, because why is a very important word. And the third rule is get out of their way and let them do the job that you've trained them to do. Don't stand over their shoulder micromanaging, because you're going to make them feel like they're 8 years old and mom is watching them do their arithmetic homework. So if you follow those 3 rules, you're going to hire the best people, you're going to train them well, you're going to get out of their way, and you're going to cut down massively on turnover. You're going to keep your people around longer because they know that you value them and that you treat them like human beings and not cogs in a machine.
Mm-hmm. I want to put some parentheses around that why real quick for the listeners. It's one of the things that we learned at In-N-Out, because that company had been around since 1948. They always talked about their why. An example of that would be when you go through the drive-thru. You got some In-N-Outs out there in Texas if you're still there.
Oh, yeah. I go to the one up on Lover's Lane.
There you go. Perfect. Well, if you go through the drive-thru and they ask you if you're eating in the car, they'll give you a piece of paper to put on your lap. Now, the obvious is, to protect your clothes or whatever. But the history behind that goes all the way back to 1949, 1950. And if you think back then, a lot of the men were the workers in the family bringing in the money, and they wore suits and ties to work every day. And they didn't want that to get dirty from the perspective, hey, we're giving you this food that's, juicy and greasy, all these things. We don't want your suit to get ruined. So they started handing out, it was butcher paper at the time, because this was a meat company that had a little hamburger restaurant. Now, what's cool about this, and this gives your point of the why, is that there was a difference in opinion from the 2 partners at the time, and they literally split the company in 2 over that lap paper, over the customer service. So all the way to this day, In-N-Out still teaches the why of why that lap paper goes on the lap and how important it was to the establishment of who they are today. Can you talk about some of the whys that you saw in your organization? Because I think people miss teaching their employees the why so often.
Well, here's now we're going to talk about, we've come full circle here. We'll talk about Bill Walton again, because this has to do with the great UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, who won 10 consecutive NCAA titles, and Bill played for him. I got to meet Coach Wooden because he held a summer basketball camp in Thousand Oaks every summer while the Cowboys were in training camp. And he told me one day, I asked him if a story that I heard over the years was true. And he said, yes, it was. The first practice of every season of his coaching career for 38, 39, whatever years it was, the first practice, the first thing he would do is sit down the court with his players and teach them how to put on their sneakers and socks. Now, did Bill Walton need someone to teach him how to put on his sneakers and socks? No, he knew how. But what Coach Wooden taught them was, if you put your socks on right and you pull them up so there's no seams and you're smooth, and then you put your sneakers on and you lace them up and you tie a double knot, you're not going to get any blisters. If you don't get blisters, you're not going to lose playing time. If you don't lose playing time, we'll win more games. So what was he teaching them? Not how to put their sneakers on. He was teaching them that if you take care of the little things, like a napkin for your suit, you take care of the little things, the big things take care of themselves. It's the attention to detail that's going to get you ahead. It worked for In-N-Out. It worked for Coach Wooden. It worked for the Cowboys. Take care of the little things, big things fall into place. Make sure that all the players know each week when the bus is leaving the facility for the airport for a charter flight for a road game. Make sure that the hotel reservations are all correct. Make sure that the media has what they need. All those little things turn into Super Bowl championships.
Yeah, they sure do. By the way, if you listen to the show for a while, in our earlier shows, probably in the first 20 or 30, I'll have to go back and look. Andy Hill was on our show, who also played for John Wooden at the same time as Bill Walton. And Andy ultimately wrote John Wooden's autobiography. So you might want to check out that show. He does talk about lacing up the shoes. Yep. So, Mark, I'm just curious, when I look at an organization that you played a role in here with the Cowboys, they seem like the type of team that, they have their mission in front of them and nobody's going to get in their way, which I appreciate. How do you have that mentality but still succeed? In other words, not having people fall off because they can't keep up with the pace of somebody as successful as that team and what you did in broadcasting.
It's kind of funny as far as the Cowboys go. For us, the actual football season was the easiest time of the year because everything was planned and everything was regimented. And we had procedures, we had checklists, and everything went according to plan. In the off season, when we were putting everything together for the next season, that's when the real hectic time was going on and ideas were being thrown around, and we're going back and saying, did this work as well as it should have? Maybe not. Let's try this instead. But if you keep everybody abreast of what's going on in the organization and you keep explaining, as we said, the why to them of why you're doing it, everybody knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if you will jump to another team for a moment, the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick, his motto for his players is very simple: do your job. That's a great motto, right? Because of two reasons. First of all, it's do your job, do what we pay you for. But the second one is do your job. If you're the left tackle, don't try to do the quarterback's job. If you're the general manager, don't try to do the trainer's job. Do your job. And that even though Tex didn't express it in those terms, that was always made very plain to us, that we were there to do what we were supposed to do and not bleed over into other people's areas without at least explaining why.
Yeah, very good point. In your bio, you talk about, people, the team they're not just a bunch of cogs in the wheel, right? It's made up of people.
Yep.
And how we relate to them on a personal level as leaders and our way to, build championships, not just on the field, but in our own businesses and in our own lives. How do we help people relate to our principles or establish those principles?
Well, let me give you a brief comparison of two jobs. In 1975, I was the weekend sports anchor at the CBS TV station here in Dallas. And I'd been there 6 weeks. I had yet to meet the general manager, my boss. One day, the elevator doors open. I was going to go down in the newsroom. The elevator doors open. The general manager was standing there reading a newspaper. I got in the elevator. I said, "Good morning, Mr. Smith." Hadn't met him yet. He looked down over the top of his newspaper and glared at me. And then he snapped the newspaper and he kept up and he kept reading. Never spoke a word to me. Mm-hmm. I didn't last there very long. Now, contrast that with, and I remember the exact date, September 26, 1976, I was a game day PR assistant for the Cowboys in charge of the radio TV press box. We were playing the Baltimore Colts that day, and I got there instead of 3 hours before kickoff, which was normal. I got there midway through the second quarter. because that was the day that my first child, my son Kelly, was born. I told everybody I may not be there on time, and everybody understood.
Yeah.
Now, jump to Tuesday after that game. We had what we call the weekly Landry luncheon, where Coach Landry would meet the media. We put out, as the PR department each week, a list of big plays of the game and statistics and things, and handed it out at that luncheon. I was not involved in putting that piece of paper together, but that week, without even telling me, they handed out the sheet to everybody. And at the bottom, it had the big play on offense, the big play on defense. And then it said, biggest play of the game, Kelly Robert Oristano for arriving at Methodist Hospital, weighing 7 pounds and 6 ounces and keeping his father away from the game for the first half. Everybody read that in the room. And after they read it, everybody, including Tex and Coach Landry, came over to congratulate me. Which organization would you rather work for?
That's right.
TV station or the football team? No question. So to put it into one small sentence, I would say to anybody who's a manager in any job, it's not about you, it's about your team. I can't say it any simpler.
Yeah, that's about as good as it gets. I was just telling somebody a story the other day. I've been very fortunate to work with a number of athletes. I was with our state superintendent of schools, and we were meeting at the same place. We left one place and we're going to the next place at the same time. And I got there well before her. And she says, sorry, I'm late. I said, no, it reminds me of Arnold Palmer. If Arnold Palmer is sitting at a dinner table with Jack and Jack goes to the bathroom, he'll be right back. Arnold Palmer goes to the bathroom, it'll take him an hour because he'll shake everybody's hands on the way to the bathroom and everybody's hands on the way back, whereas Jack will just come and go. And to me, that's great leadership. Exactly what you're exemplifying. It's the small things that are important, and people forget that, especially as they rise to the top of leadership or stardom or whatever that might be.
Yep. It's if you're too busy to take care of your people like people, if you're too busy to exercise what some people have called your MBWA, your management by walking around, right? Walk around the place, meet your employees, get to know them, find out who's sending a kid to college, find out who's trying to buy a house. You don't have to become their best friend. And, obviously you want to have a certain distance because there's going to come times when you have to let people go, and that should be painful for you. But if you want your people to respond to you, you got to treat them like people, because that's what they are. I mean, it's such a simple concept that I think the reason it's not followed is because a lot of people look at it and say, well, this is simple. It won't work. It does work. Believe me, it works. And you try it, it works.
Works better than most people realize it. If you do any data research right now, if you're listening, by the way, employees are looking for affirmations that they're doing a good job. The post-COVID environment, everybody lives in this small amount of fear that they're worried about doing a good job. So to Mark's point, walking around really does make a difference, getting to know your people. Mark, I live in a world of coaching others and helping build businesses and strategies and consultants. And so, other people like that are on my radar. And what I've seen a lot of with some of these influencers, they're kind of, and I'm looking for your advice to them because, I want your voice out there. They've got this mentality, screw the rest. We're gonna hit the finish line. Only the strong survive. And to a degree, it's important to have that mentality of, hey, we can win. But I feel like they're just shedding people along the way that might be valuable resources because they're so focused on the finish line, they've forgotten about their team. And I'm just curious what your statement would be to those people and how to reel that back in, because I don't think it's working.
Well, I think the one key is that a lot of people have always said, people don't quit their jobs; they quit their managers. They leave because they're unhappy with not with the work. The work is maybe very fulfilling for them, but if you walk in the door, and I've had these jobs, if you walk in the door in the morning and the first thing you do is feel a tightness in your gut because you're going to see your manager soon and you don't like the guy and he treats you like dirt, that's a terrible way to feel. And nobody wants to feel that. Goes back to Tex's statement that nobody does their best work in a climate of fear. And I think if you talk to anybody who's in a place where he likes to work, where he's happy in what he's doing, one of the first things he or she will tell you is, I get along great with everybody, including management. They treat, I know I'm valued here and that's why I stay. So you're sure you have to have a goal. Everybody needs to know what the goal is and everybody needs to work toward the goal. But all the time you're working toward it, if you're not being treated like a person, you're not going to last very long. It's very simple.
Yeah, good point. And I think it's important to rally your team to have some grit and perseverance, but you have to realize that there's parameters within that grit and perseverance as well. People are only capable of so much, so often, especially if they're working for you and it's your business, not theirs.
Well, I saw a story recently about, I hope I get his name right. I think his name is Walt Ettinger, and he's the head of the Schwab Investment Company. And he has not a theory, but a plan that he puts into effect when he's interviewing somebody for a management job. What he'll do is he'll take them to breakfast at a coffee shop near the office. Before the guy gets there, Ettinger will tell the guy who runs the coffee shop, make sure that my waiter screws up this guy's order really bad. So he's not going to get in trouble. I'll give him a really big tip. Make sure he gets the order all wrong. And then when the order is brought and it's all wrong, he watches how the guy reacts to his problem. And if he snaps at the waiter and says, I didn't order this, take this back and make it right. You don't want to hire that guy because he doesn't know how to relate to people. Yeah. But if he's I asked for scramble. Maybe I didn't say it loud enough. Can we get this sweet? If he's nice to the guy, then he's passed that test. Very simple test. It's a very simple idea, but it pays a lot down. It pays dividends down the road because you know right away whether or not this guy is going to be good with his people.
Yeah. Great point. I used to use that tactic as well. I was in charge of donating money to charity organizations. I always took them out to lunch. I wanted to see how they treated others. It's a great tactic. You speak a lot about, and it seems like you're a bit of an expert in employee turnover and keeping team members within the organization through your Lead with Principle. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the values that you like to exchange with others?
Well, in terms of keeping people around, I think everybody knows the statistics. We hate turnovers in football, right? Turnovers in football kill you, right? Well, turnover in workplace kills you too. It costs upwards of 30% of the terminated employee's salary to replace them, because you've got interview costs, you got to bring people in and talk to them. Other people have to double up on work to cover up for who's not there. It puts pressure on them. It's an insidious process. So if you can do anything to help to cut that turnover number, you're going to do great things for your company. And as we said, it's going to cost you a little bit more in the beginning to hire better people, but that pays off down the road because they don't leave. And if you are serious and wanting to put together the best staff you can, you have to have an eye on that turnover indicator. If people are leaving right and left, you need to sit down and ask yourself, what's happening here? Why is this going on? Is it me? Is it the culture that I've fostered within the organization? Is it, the weather? Is it that our cubicles are ugly? I mean, you got to go through everything and find out those little things that you need to take care of to make the big things take care of themselves. How are you treating your people? It's the same as how you treat your family. How do you treat your spouse and your kids and your friends? Mm-hmm. If you're a jerk, people aren't going to want to hang around you.
Mark, how do you turn around somebody, a leader, somebody running a company that maybe they do have some success in a lot of areas, so that arrogance is taking the best of them when they don't realize it's them, that they're the actual reason for the turnover? Because, a lot of times, I don't want to call it dumb luck because they've achieved success for a reason, but oftentimes it's to the pain of losing a lot of people all the time. How do you turn that person around? How do you make them realize, hey, look, Joe, it's you?
Well, you just ask them if, do you like the way your bottom line looks every year? Do you like that huge cost that you have for replacing people, and the fact that maybe it's taken you longer to get to your goals than it should because you have to keep retraining people? Have you really taken a chance to look in the mirror and say, am I doing the right thing? If you haven't, give it a try for 6 months. What's the worst that could happen? Is it going to get worse than it is now? Probably not. But if you can't be honest with yourself in any aspect of life, it isn't going to matter. You're going to just doing what you want to do because that's the way we've always done things. But the way we've always done things doesn't help you grow. With the Cowboys, every offseason we spent tons of time going over all our checklists, going over all our procedures. Can we do this better? Can we get information across? I spent some time with the Cowboys helping to develop the first computer statistics program that the NFL ever had for game day stats because we wanted to find a better way to do it. And it didn't necessarily work as well as it should have. It took a while. This was back with the old Apple IIe computers that were huge and didn't have a lot of power. But, we blazed a trail in that way because we wanted to find a better way to do things. And you can rest on your laurels, but eventually everybody will pass you by.
Sure. Mark, you've got a lot to share and a lot of value to bring to the table. Give us just a hint on Lead with Principle and the work that you do in case people want to discover more about you or do some work with you, because, I really feel like, again, in this post-COVID environment, we have so many entrepreneurs out there, people that have got out of their comfort zone to start businesses, and how they lead those businesses so critical to their success. And, if you're just getting started, these are great messages. I hope you're taking notes to the things that Mark said today, because these will make a difference in your long-term success. But where do they reach out to you, or tell us a little bit about what you do specifically as a resource?
Well, there are so many instances in life and in history where people will say, this is the day that everything changed. And it really, a lot of times isn't true. It's just a bad patch. But COVID has changed a ton about the office place and the way we work and the way we hire and the way we use people and the way we use employees. What we try to do at Lead with Principle is pass along some of this information from my years with the Cowboys and the best way to run an organization. And I present it in a series of very short modules. I'm trained as a journalist, so I do everything. I try to be concise. I don't want to make you spend 25 hours watching videos. The whole course is probably about 4 hours total if you lump it all together. And it's just expanding on what we've talked about here today. And it is at leadwithprinciple.com, principle with L-E at the end, not A-L. Excuse me. And if you go to that website, you will find out more about it, how you can take a look at it, sign up for it if you want. And hopefully it will make you see that even though Tex is no longer around and the Cowboys are a vastly different organization now, those old-time values still work, and they're worth trying out in your company.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's some of the simplest things that you mentioned earlier, and it's amazing that we want to overcomplicate these things as humans. So it sounds like Mark will get you right back to where you need to be. Here's the interesting thing, Mark, and we both shared a couple stories about some of the successful people we've been involved with. It's hard for that not to bleed off onto us and allow us to teach the way that we teach and offer the advice that we offer. And I would just beg people to look into Mark's Lead with Principle, because, he was part of this top organization for a number of years that brings that value. It's bled into his system now. Take advantage of it, especially if you can get something like that in 4 hours or less in bullet points, which is the way I like things.
I'm sure that somewhere out there's somebody who does a seminar about how to be a really mean SOB and beat your people to death. But I wouldn't want to take that one. I'd pass with that. And since I've left football, I've been out of football and broadcasting for a while, but I've been involved in theater. I'm an actor. I write books. I've been run a photography business. I've tried to bring as many of those principles with me from Tex and the Cowboys as I could. And to be perfectly bluntly honest about it, they always work. Yeah. I wish I could tell you that there are times when I failed by being a nice guy, but you don't fail that way.
Well, there's a reason why the things that you said are in common with the things that I've learned throughout my career with some of the organizations I've been with. They work. And if Mark resonates with you, please reach out to him. Look at his website. I will put the website in the show notes so that you have that. Mark, I really appreciate your time stepping aside, and really thank you for your story. To me, again, it's just amazing that you had a vision as a 14-year-old and you lived that life because it resonated with you so well.
It is kind of a storybook story. People kind of blanch when they hear it, I guess. But it was, it was something I decided I wanted to do, and I was lucky enough to kind of work my way into that process and into that organization, and it paid great dividends. It was a great thrill from all those years.
Well, and I'm old enough to remember that organization and what the Dallas Cowboys represented. Man, you were at the top of the pile there, sir. So thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. Hey, if you've enjoyed this show, please share it with a friend. We don't do a lot of advertising. Actually, the only advertising we do is on shows that were 200 shows ago. So anyways, thank you for your interest and listening to the Answers Yes podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answers Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer, has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen, and thank you, and have a great week.